Welcome everyone. Governor, Senator, County Executive, Congressman, and dear distinguished guests, I would like to welcome you. I am Mustafa Tansır. I'm a tri-continent man doing business in tri-state. Tri-continent means, as a Turkish, which is like Asia, Eurasia, born in Germany, Europe, and I'm an American also, so I'm representing three continents over here. On behalf of Delaware Council, it is my pleasure to welcome you all to this plenary session on politics and social justice. Social justice is a celebration of diversity and celebration of our Constitution that guarantees equality regardless of your background or religion or ethnicity or national your origin. Our Prophet taught us, if you are rest while your neighbor remains hungry, you are not one of us. And also our holy book, Quran, teach us, watch over the orphans, care the poor, and help the homeless. We cannot be a good Muslim without being a good man, without being a good people. This is universally accepted among every society and every religion. Treat children with compassion, fight against persecutions, torture, and murder, and fight against the injustice. This is how the world will know that we are a good people. The whole earth has been entrusted to us. All of its beauty and resources have been given to us to use and care for. We are responsible to pass it on to our children. Possibly the greatest sickness of our time is living in excess. Taking what is not needed, thinking only of oneself, and not looking to the needs of others. This mentality strips our world of the resources we need to live. Every time we take more than we need, we leave less for someone else. We live in a multicultural society that gives no regard, no race, no religion, gender, or culture. However, the growing gap between the rich and the poor is a source of great conflict. The growth of this disparity serves only to breed horror and the terror. If we want to leave the world a better place for our children, we need to make a choice to do what we know is right now. Beginning with our local communities, then our country, then finally the world. We need to invest in making the world better. In this regard, our lawmakers and the politicians need to take steps to restore our social justice. We should not be a country where people go bankrupt because they cannot afford their health care. We should not have the people going to jail because they cannot pay child support. And we should not be a nation where men, women, and children cannot receive a good education simply because they cannot afford. We need to stand up and fight for liberty and the justice as our founding fathers did. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a star-studded panel here that can not only reflect on social justice in Delaware, but can actually make the necessary changes to make our society more harmonious. Our keynote speaker is second-term governor, Mr. Jack Markell, who has not only hosted the first ever iftar in the governor's mansion this year, but has also transformed our economy to make it one of the best in the country. I am a Delaware-based businessman. I know firsthand how the economy has grown, has recovered in this Delaware country, in Delaware State under the governor. Distinguished guests, I know you are not here to listen my lecture. Now I would like to pass the word my dear friend, Dr. Muqtedar Khan, who will going to moderating this session and for further instructions. Thank you very much again.
Mustafa Tuncer, thank you very much. He's one of the most important leaders in our community. And one thing with Mustafa is, if you need help, for no matter what reason, you call him, and he's always there. A couple of my students are going in January to Morocco to run a training camp for girls in Morocco. They needed some help to buy shoes for the girls in Morocco, and Mustafa was the biggest donor that I could find. Thank you very much, Mustafa. The organizers of this panel are very grateful to all the panelists who have agreed. It took some coordination, but we are delighted that we could have all of you here. This is perhaps the first Muslim event where nearly the entire leadership of the state of Delaware is attending and speaking. We debated to a great extent whether we should call it the governor's panel. But we couldn't confirm whether Mazhar is going to run for the governor of Pennsylvania or not. That's why we didn't call it. We have the former governor, the present governor, and inshallah the next governor, and down the pipeline, another governor. I'm talking about you, Brian. Governor in training. So without much ado, I would like to invite Governor Markell, who has been a great friend for the Muslim community, and he's also been a person who has been willing to reach out to all the minorities and all the marginalized communities in the state of Delaware, and is best suited to speak on the issues of politics and social justice. Governor.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and Professor Khan, thank you very much. I actually first met Professor Khan. I was not yet governor, but I met Professor Khan and his son over the ping pong table in Newark, and we had some great games, and it was a nice way to meet each other, and I've appreciated your friendship ever since. So thank you. It's great to be here with Senator Carper and Congressman Carney and State Senator Brian Townsend and the leadership of the Muslim community here in Delaware. I want to make particular mention of Anas Benati, who is the director of Delaware State Housing Authority. And you mentioned that you have some of your students who will be going to Morocco. Anas is a native of Morocco, still has family there, and I'm sure he's happy to bake all of the Moroccan cookies and do whatever else you would like before you go. But Anas does a great job as the head of the State Housing Authority, and I'm very lucky to have him in our cabinet. You know, the moment that we all find ourselves in now is a bit of a paradox, or at least it feels like a bit of a paradox. Because our society, both our government and our public's consciousness, we have made some good progress, some real progress in our never-ending mission to achieve social justice. Now, we define that mission as building a country that very much reflects our most fundamental value, that everybody deserves a fair opportunity to reach their potential, to work hard and to participate in our communities while living with dignity and safety and in happiness. I think in many ways we are closer to that ideal than we've ever been. You know, many of us grew up at a time when it was legal to discriminate based on race or religion or ethnicity. We rejected those laws, and recently I signed legislation that added sexual orientation and gender identity to those who were protected from discrimination in Delaware. And the list of milestones of progress is long, but the fact is that many among us still lack the opportunities of a just society. We have a lot of work to do, from ensuring access to a high-quality education, to addressing the inequities of our criminal justice system, to stopping discriminatory behaviors that remain too common in housing and in other areas. And most importantly, we've got to continue to strive for a society in which law-abiding citizens feel comfortable when they express themselves. And we need to make sure that all people are welcomed within our borders. So despite all of our progress, though, we also see some disturbing and often frightening signs of divisiveness that threaten the pursuit of our country's ideals. And it's evident, among other ways, in some of today's anti-immigration rhetoric. Division, whether by race or religion or ethnicity or any other characteristic, breeds fear of each other, and it inhibits compassion. And I don't think there's anything that's more dangerous to our ideals than that. Now, we've seen this many times before, directed at the Japanese, or the Irish, or the Jews, to name but three. And the recent national dialogue regarding Syrian refugees also highlights this threat. Now, I think reasonable minds can very much differ on matters of international security and humanitarian policy. Who should conduct the reviews of applications for refugees? What documentation is required? What actions most broadly give us the best chance of resolving the crisis in Syria? But those questions are different from what I would call alarming enthusiasm with which some politicians, and especially those running for president, have jumped to the harshest possible stance against the Syrian refugees. Many of them have sought to scare Americans, and they have made bombastic demands for changes to our policies with no basis in fact. And perhaps most frightening were those explicit appeals by some candidates to discriminate against refugees on the basis of religion. And that is an idea that directly contradicts one of our oldest and dearest values. Some went as far as suggesting support for creating a database to register Muslims. And we must do no such thing. Now, this should not be a partisan debate. There's no party affiliation attached to this Statue of Liberty, which is famously inscribed with the appeal to give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. We are not a country that turns away families fleeing devastating violence and horrifying living conditions. People so desperate that they will run toward the harsh winter of Europe and put small children aboard precarious boats because in their minds they have judged that that is safer than the chaos that has engulfed their homeland. Now, we are a nation that prides itself on the diversity of our citizens, and we believe that our differences in religion and national origin and viewpoint are actually our greatest strengths. That has never been a matter of partisan difference or national debate. It is a part of the very fabric of our national identity, of who we are. And when we abandon that fabric, we abandon our hope to live in peace and freedom and prosperity. So we have got to see these people who are fleeing their homeland not as foreigners or outsiders, but as mothers and fathers and children who are seeking a better life. We've got to live up to the aspiration of John F. Kennedy, who eloquently spoke at another time of great national fear of those who were different from us. And he said, we all breathe the same air, we all cherish our children's future, and we are all mortal. Now, as you know, I've spoken out about my feeling regarding the nation accepting refugees who have been properly vetted from Syria or any crisis, any country in crisis, of any age, of any religion. And while my office helps provide a platform to talk about it, the fact is state officials don't really have a legal ability to impact refugee policy, but we are all part of this democracy. You know, the voice of justice, whether in defense of refugees or the homeless on our streets, whether in opposition to racism or Islamophobia or anti-Semitism or xenophobia or homophobia, the voice of justice only resonates in a democracy if it is heard loudly from all the people. And to me, that's what this conference is really all about. Because I strongly encourage all of you to engage with your elected officials and prospective candidates for public office. You've got to make your voices heard through the traditional media, through social media, and continue to convene gatherings that bring communities together and to foster an understanding among people of different backgrounds. We must all do our part. Just as all people of goodwill must speak out against terrorism, including that terror which is conducted by extremists of any religion, I implore you Don't shy away from sharing your ideas or from getting involved in both faith-based and secular community institutions, because don't shy away because you think I'm only one person and what difference can I possibly make? You can make a big difference. Now, the Muslim community in particular, I believe, has much to offer in these discussions and debates. At a time when some choose to spread fear, we would frankly all do well to consider passages from the Quran, calling on us to celebrate our diversity and live with love and respect and compassion for all people. In the Quran, in Surat al-Ma'idah, how'd I do, Nas? Is that good? All right. He had me practicing. Thank you. All right. That applause really belongs to Anas because it was his pronunciation lesson. But in that part of the Quran, it says, had God willed, he would have made you a single community. But he wanted to test you regarding what has come to you. So compete with each other in doing good. Compete with each other in doing good. Now that passage epitomizes what we should want for our country, because following it will help us make our nation a more just place. You know, we have been given the opportunity to live in this incredible melting pot and to see both the challenges and the extraordinary possibilities of the fact that God did not make human beings into a single community. And we have got to respond to this test both ambitiously and pragmatically. We've got to find the root causes of injustice and inequality and then make it our goal to eradicate them. And that has been, thank you. And that has very much informed my work as governor. And as a government, we can and we've got to set the bar high. We don't accept the status quo, and I'm asking you not to accept the status quo either. We know from dramatic changes in our society since generations past that no matter how intractable the status quo may be, change is possible. And it does not come from governments alone. One of this country's great historians, a guy named David McCullough, and he says, among the most difficult and important concepts to convey in teaching or writing history is the simple fact that things never had to turn out as they did. Events past, they were never on a track. Nothing was foreordained any more than it is right now. And what that means is the future that we want for our kids and ourselves and for our grandchildren and their children, that future is very much in our hands. It's by the way, one of the reasons I'm pleased to see a number of young people here today. These are our choices to make, and we've got to choose between love and fear, between acceptance and division. And gatherings like this give me a lot of hope that we will make the right choice. Now let me close with this. In 1963, Martin Luther King went to Birmingham, Alabama. And he went there because it was the most segregated city in the country. And he went to lead a nonviolent protest. And when he got to Birmingham, he was arrested and he was put in jail. When he got to jail, he received a letter from members of the clergy there in Birmingham. And in their letter, the members of the clergy complained to Dr. King. They complained that he had come to Birmingham at all. They said he was stirring the pot. They said if he had just waited, everything would have turned out okay. So he was there in prison, and he didn't have anything to write on but the fringes of a newspaper. And he had nothing to write with but the stub of a pencil. And he wrote this, he wanted to write a letter back to the clergy. And he wrote this amazing letter back. And in it, among many other things, he wrote that we will have to repent in our generation, not just for the hateful actions and words of the bad people, but also for the appalling silence of the good people. We will have to repent not just for the hateful words and actions of the bad people, but also we will have to repent for the appalling silence of the good people. Now, I close with that for a reason, because we have a choice to make. We can leave this day and say that the Muslim community in Delaware put on a great event, and a lot of elected officials, the top elected officials in the state came and spoke, and that's a great thing, and it probably wouldn't happen in other states, and we had a lot of people attend, not just people from the Muslim community, but we had students from St. Andrews and other people from throughout Delaware, people who were interested in social justice. And isn't that a wonderful thing that we got all those people to turn out? That is one response we could take from this day. But the other response is to say it's up to all of us to make sure that we put in the energy. Because refraining from doing the bad, as Dr. King said, is not sufficient. Having the energy and the commitment and the determination and the persistence to get out there and do what we must do to make the promise of social justice real, that is what we must be all about. And I have spent now not a lot of time, but more and more time, as Professor Khan mentioned, with this community. And I am hopeful. I am optimistic. This is a rapidly growing community. This is a community of rapidly growing importance, not just in numbers, but in its message, in its voice. And I know that I speak for myself, and I'm guessing I speak for Senator Carper and Congressman Carney and Senator Townsend and all the elected officials in the state when I say that we look forward to working with you to make this idea of social justice not just a slogan, not something that just fits on the cover of a convention program, but something that is real to all of the people of our state. Thank you very much for having me.
It's moments like this when you really feel proud that you're an American. I must confess that in the last few weeks, I've been watching and listening to the Republican presidential debates and secretly filling forms to migrate to Sweden, to Canada, to Norway. But now I will go back and delete all those forms. I'm also glad that neither Hillary nor Bernie Sanders are watching the speech that you gave, Governor. Thank you very much for a very eloquent expression of what this conference is all about. Our next speaker is Senator Carper. Senator Carper has come to share with us a lot of thoughts. He told me he's prepared to speak for 30 minutes, but he's going to speak only for 15 minutes. But I'm very grateful for him for agreeing to speak, and I look forward to hearing you, Senator.
Thank you, Dr. Khan, and to our distinguished head table guests, to our governor, our Congressman, to Brian, to others that have joined us here today. Dr. Khan told me how long you prepared to speak, and I said, 2 hours. So I could probably cut it back to about 150. Maybe we're lucky 145. But seriously, I told him I was prepared to talk for 30 minutes, but I'd probably be able to get it done in 15. And I said, it'll seem like 30. But it will only really be maybe 15 years. How many of you were born outside of the U.S.? How many of you were born outside of the U.S.? That's good. How many of you were born in West Virginia? I was born in West Virginia. How many of you were born or grew up in Virginia? I grew up in Virginia. How many won a Navy ROTC scholarship and went to Ohio State and became a naval flight officer? That would be me. That would be me. I was born in January of 1947. And I was born in West Virginia, and I was born about 18 months after the end of World War II. And my dad had served as an enlisted man in World War II. He was a chief petty officer in the Navy. All my uncles, except for one who later served in the Korean War, but all of my uncles served in World War II. Some were in the Navy, some were in the Army. My dad and my uncles came back at the end of the war, except for one. My mom's youngest brother was on the deck of a U.S. Air Force or U.S. Navy carrier called the Sewanee in 1944. He's 19 years old. They were attacked by kamikaze planes from the Japanese. They attacked the aircraft carrier. And my uncle and a number of other seamen who were on the deck of the ship that day were killed. Their bodies were never recovered. The person who was the president at that time was Franklin Roosevelt. And later, before the war would end, he would die. And another fellow would become president named Harry Truman. And in a minute, I want to share with you some of just one thing, one I think especially important thing that he said to us in this country, gosh, maybe 70 years ago. You may recall that World War II began on December 7th, 1941. Today is December 5th. Monday is December 7th. And it will have been, gosh, you do the math, 74 years on Monday since that fateful day. Thousands of American sailors were killed in a surprise attack by the Japanese in Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. The U.S. naval fleet, the Pacific Fleet, lay in ruins at the end of the day. And on the heels of that attack by the Japanese, millions of Americans would answer the call to arms and enlist and sign up to serve in the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines. We didn't even have an Air Force, it was the Army Air Force. And people served as merchant mariners and people served in the Coast Guard. At the same time that they were standing forward to defend our country, an order went out not for people to enlist and join our armed forces. The order went out for people of Japanese descent to show up and turn themselves in, to leave their homes, to leave their farms, to leave their businesses, in some cases to leave their families, in order to report for a different kind of duty. And some would call it an imprisonment. Some call it an internment. But that's where most of them spent, or many of them spent, World War II. Not every one of them. Some were repatriated back to Japan. Some made the decision to move from the West Coast, where most of the internment took place, to go to the East Coast. Some decided to actually enlist in the United States Army. A lot of them just hunkered down and stayed there in these internment camps, overcrowded, poor living conditions, until the war would end in 1946. In 1944, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a ruling. And the ruling that the Supreme Court issued basically said, this ain't right. Talk about social justice. This is not what our country's all about. And began the release, if you will, of the folks that were in these internment camps, and the last of them left in 1946. Believe it or not, the most decorated unit for its size and length of service in the history of American warfare, I'll say this again, the military unit most decorated for its size and for its length of service in the history of the United States was an outfit called the Army's 442nd Regimental Combat Team, a unit of the United States Army. It was comprised almost entirely of soldiers of Japanese descent. They served in Europe, especially served in Italy and southern France and in Germany. There was a unit that had 4,000 men who served. They were in some of the toughest fighting of the war in Europe. Many of them would die, others would be badly wounded, and their numbers turned over 2.5 times during the course of the last 2 years of the war because of death and because of people who were badly wounded. During the course of that war, the 14,000 men who served in the 442nd Combat Regiment, out of the 14,000, listen to this, 9,486 of them earned Purple Hearts. 9,486 earned Purple Hearts. And that's not all. This unit earned the Presidential Distinguished Unit Award not once, not twice, not 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 times, not 7 times, but 8 times. 8 times. The Distinguished Unit of the United States Army. 5 times in 1 month. 5 times in 1 month. And while they were fighting and dying for our freedom as a nation, many of their families served out the rest of the war, not in a uniform, but in an internment camp, because of the fear that folks had in this country that somehow those Japanese would turn on us and wreak havoc. One of the people who served in that unit was a fellow named Danny Inouye. Danny Inouye. He didn't just serve, he was one of the 21 members of the 442nd who received the Presidential Medal of Honor. There's no higher honor for those who serve in the military. He lost his arm, not his life. Came home eventually, at the end of the war, got an education. He became, when Hawaii became a state, he became the first U.S. congressman, U.S. representative, the job that John Carney holds in service to our country today. Served for a couple of years, later became a United States Senator. Only one person in the history of the country died a couple of years ago. He served until his death. I was privileged to serve with him for a number of years. Only one person in the history of our country has served longer in the U.S. Senate than Dan Inouye. Only one person, Robert Byrd. Another fellow who served in that same period of time in the military was another fellow whom I served, previously had served in the Congress, a fellow named Dan Akaka. In World War II, his job was to serve in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, helping to build things that help us to build and to actually win the war. I don't know if it seems ironic or maybe cruel to you that the idea while the men of the 442nd and the men of Danny Akaka's Army Corps of Engineers team were risking their lives, giving their lives to defend freedom in this country, their families lost their freedom. Lost their freedom. Harry Truman once said, later after the war was over, he said these words. I'll paraphrase him, but the only thing that's new in the world is the history we forgot or never learned. Think about that. The only thing that's new in the world is the history we forgot or never learned. What do we take from that sad chapter of our nation's life? When more than 100,000 people who love this country, they just happen to be of Japanese descent, many of whom serve valiantly in defense of this country, and yet think of the way that we treated them. What do we learn from that? Is there still a lesson there for all of us? You bet there is. You bet there is. And we had better not forget it. We had better not forget it. I want to go back even further in time. I want to go back with me 2,000 years. None of us were around. We're not even a gleam in our father's or mother's eye. 2,000 years ago, Jewish rabbi, a young guy, was being inquisitioned by a bunch of folks called Pharisees. They're trying to get him in trouble with the Roman authorities. And they said to him one day, look, you're so smart, Rabbi. Rabbi means teacher. Said, you're so smart, Rabbi. Why do you tell us what is the most important, the greatest commandment of all? And he looked at him and he said, there's not one, there's actually two. There's not one, there's actually two. And I said, all right, what are they? And he said, the first is to love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, all thy soul, and all thy mind. And he said, well, what's the second one? And he said, the second one is to love thy neighbor as thyself. And they asked him the question, he said, well, who is our neighbor? And he told them a parable, he told them a story about the Good Samaritan that many of us have heard what other faith that we are from. Story of the Good Samaritan, to illustrate that we're all one another's neighbors. In the end, we're all one another's neighbors. And the reminder he gave us that day, and 2,000 years later, it still resonates, is we have a moral obligation to treat other people the way we want to be treated. That's social justice. Wherever they come from, whatever walk of life, we have an obligation to put ourselves in their shoes and treat them the way we would want to be treated. That's a 2,000-year-old lesson. And we need to remember that one today, too. And as it turns out, the Golden Rule, which is what we call it, the Golden Rule, isn't just present in the Bible. It's also in the Quran, and we looked up some words, and some of this may sound familiar to you, but this is what we find in the faith of Islam, their version of the Golden Rule. No one of you is a quote. No one of you is a believer until he desires for his brother that which he desires for himself. The Jewish faith, John's Catholic, Governor's Jewish, Tom is Presbyterian Protestant. The Jewish faith, they say it just a little bit better. Don't do unto others the things that you wouldn't want to have done to yourself. This is an international commandment, almost regardless of our faith. In every faith, we find these words or words similar to them. The other words that we find in the New Testament, I'm a Presbyterian. Our pastor reminds us of this about every other week. The New Testament, the first book of the New Testament is called Matthew. Some of you know Matthew 25. And there's a passage there about the least of these. The least of these. And it goes something like this. When I was hungry, did you feed me? When I was thirsty, did you give me to drink? When I was naked, did you clothe me? When I was a stranger in your land, did you welcome me? That's 2,000 years old. And for me, I hope for you, those are words that still resonate with me and frankly need to resonate with all of us. When I was a stranger in your land, did you welcome me? We have a couple of competing priorities here. At least some people think that we do. We have, I think, a moral obligation to the least of these, the folks that are hungry, thirsty, naked, homeless, a stranger in our lands. We have a moral obligation to the least of these. And at the same time that we try to meet that moral obligation, especially to the strangers in our land, we have a moral obligation to make sure that in doing that, we don't somehow put in harm's way the folks that are already here, that are American citizens. And some people say, you can't do that. We can't do both. We cannot meet the moral obligation to those who come to this country or want to come to this country, and at the same time meet the moral obligation that we have to provide security to all of us who live here. I think that's a false choice. I think that's a false choice. I think we can do both, and we need to do both. I'll close with this. I'm privileged to serve with Senator Chris Coons in the United States Senate. He serves on a bunch of committees. I serve on several. Congressman Carney does as well. One of the committees I serve on is called the Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs. People say, what keeps you up awake? They say, well, first of all, what's it like I was the chairman of the Homeland Security Committee the last 2 years. They say, what's it like to be the chairman of the Homeland Security Committee? I say, it's a busy neighborhood. It's a busy neighborhood. There's a lot of bad stuff going on around the world, and frankly, a lot of people who want to do great harm to us. It's a busy neighborhood. But I don't worry about the folks who are refugees, whether they're coming out of Syria or some other place. I think there are 4 million refugees coming out of Syria. who would like to have some place to go. And some of them would like to come here. We can't take 4 million people. The president says we'll take about 2,000 this year, another 10,000 maybe next year, and then we'll see what the future brings. In the meantime, we provide more money for folks that are refugees in any nation on earth. I think we could feel good about that. But let me just tell you this. For those that are fearful of the refugees who might come here, here's, out of those 4 million, the United Nations vets a bunch of them who expressed some interest in coming to the U.S., and they vet maybe 23,000 in the last year or two who expressed out of 4 million some interest in coming to the U.S. Out of the 23,000, 7,000 names, mostly children, families, older folks. Actually, out of that 23,000, 7,000 get vetted by the U.S. And out of the 7,000, we've chosen 2,000. Again, mostly women, children, families, older people. And out of the 2,000 people that have settled here so we started with 4 million to 23,000 to 7,000. We eventually was able to take in 2, and they're here. And they're here. And the number that have been charged or convicted with any kind of crime related to terror, let me hear you say 0. Let me hear you say 0. That's the number. That's the number. We have a program called the Visa Waiver System that actually facilitates travel between us and 38 other countries. It's pretty tight. We're tightening it up further. And we have folks that come here on student visas and tourist visas. And we are very mindful of the dangers that they can pose to all of us. And we are vigilant, and we're doing our dead level best to meet our second imperative, to protect the security of our people. The last word I want to say is this. Congressman Carney and our governor have heard me say probably too many times that I love to ask people who have been married a long time, what's the secret to be married a long time? And I get some really funny answers. Really funny answers. Last week I talked to this one couple. I said, what's the secret? They've been married almost 55 years. I said, what's the secret? And the wife said, standing next to her husband, she said, he's gone a lot. And I said, what do you think the secret is, sir? And he said, well, I am gone a lot. Another couple I asked not long ago, they've been married almost 60 years, and I said, what do y'all think the secret is? And the wife said, a good sense of humor. And the husband, I think, said just a bad memory, a poor memory. The best answer that I think I've ever heard, though, was the 2 C's, not Carper and Carney, not Carper and Coons, but communicate and compromise. And that's really good. And I've added a 3rd C in the meantime, and the 3rd C is to collaborate. To collaborate. And that's not just the secret for a long marriage between 2 people. That's also the secret for vibrant democracy. Think about that. To communicate, to compromise, and to collaborate. I just want to thank Dr. Khan and everybody who's put together today's assembly, and thank you for inviting all of us to come and to be here with you. I want to thank each of you for joining us. The Department of Homeland Security has a program, and I think it's a good program, and it's a partnership with communities of the Muslim faith. And the idea is to not just to try to be tracking people down and arresting people and everything, but actually working as a partnership to say, all this social media that's going on by those folks at ISIS that are trying to radicalize people in this country, let's just work together to make sure that they're not successful. And while we degrade and seek to destroy them on the battlefield, let's work in a cooperative way here in this country and community to community to make sure that this country that has endured for all these years, will be around for a whole lot longer. December 7th was not only Pearl Harbor Day. As the governor knows, and John Carney knows, December 7th was also it's called Delaware Day. And it's called Delaware Day because it was on December 7th, 1787, 228 years ago, this Monday, 25 or so men gathered in Dover, Delaware, just south of us here. And they'd spent 3 days reading this Constitution for a new country that had been written up the road in Philadelphia by representatives from 13 colonies. And they read it, debated it, argued about it for day 1 and day 2, and at the end of day 3, they said, let's ratify this, let's agree to this. And they did, 228 years ago on Monday in Dover, Delaware, the Golden Fleece Tavern. And the preamble, the very beginning of the Constitution, is something that I had to learn when I was in school. And maybe some of you did too if you went to elementary school or middle school or high school here. And I'm not going to ask everybody to repeat the whole thing, but I do want to ask you to join me in saying the very first sentence of the preamble to the Constitution. And it goes something like this. I'll say a few words, and I would invite you to participate and repeat after me. We the people of the United States of America, in order to form a more perfect union. It didn't say, or doesn't say, in order to form a perfect union. It says in order to form a more perfect union. This experiment in democracy is 228 years old. It is a tough way to govern. Winston Churchill liked to say that democracy is the worst form of government devised by wit of man, except for all the rest. It's a hard way to govern. We've been at it for 228 years. We welcome people from all over the world in this experiment. And hopefully together, we'll make our founding fathers and those who follow us proud of our efforts. God bless you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Copper, for those wonderful words. You did make me a little sad and a little somber when you talked about the Japanese internment. I think someday we will have to do something about it, to build a memorial, maybe a Japan-sized park that will protect the environment and remind us that we should never do again what we did that. It would be great if Muslims could help build a park like that. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Congressman John Carney. We had an interesting attempt to get this coordinated, and finally when we did get to talk, we had a very interesting conversation about Congressman Carney's vision on especially police-society relations, and I hope he will talk about it today, and I'm really looking forward to it. So without much ado, Congressman Carney.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Khan, for inviting me, and all of you for coming today. Special thanks to the students. I think the governor said they were from St. Andrews. I don't know if there are other students out there, but taking this amount of time on a Sunday afternoon or Saturday afternoon when a student speaks well of each of you and the teachers and adults that are here with you. I spend a lot of time at different events with our two senators, Senator Carper and Senator Coons, and the governor. Don't get as much time to spend with members of the General Assembly, but it's good to be with you too as well today. Last night we were at an event for a guy by the name of Fred Sears, and Fred is one of those really good guys that does so much and has done so much for our community over 30 or 40 years, both in business, in philanthropy, as an elected official, and as an advisor to elected officials. And the governor presented him last night with the Order of the First State, which is the highest award that the governor can confer on anyone, and nobody deserves it more than Fred. And in talking about Fred and presenting the award, the governor said, most of all, Fred has been an open ear for all elected officials and somebody that we all go to for advice before our elections. And I was sitting in the back thinking, I wish Fred had given me the same advice that he gave him when we ran against each other back in 2008. But it's good to be here with my friends, and we work together hard on so many issues. Dr. Khan and I did have a back and forth on how I would fit into the agenda today, and initially I thought I would be here for the break and maybe
I was really interested in talking about law enforcement because that's something that I've been thinking about a lot. We worked together with the delegation, the governor, Mayor Williams of the city of Wilmington, to address what I think is one of the biggest and most difficult challenges facing our state. And that is the drugs and violence and killing in the city of Wilmington. Wilmington clearly is the economic and commercial center of our state. I've lived there for 30 years. I've been troubled to see the development. I've worked with kids for a big part of that time, and I've seen kids grow up alongside my own two sons, some of which have been able to find their way out of really terrible family and neighborhood situations, and some of which have been sucked down into the violence and ended up in jail and other places. This week, if you paid any attention to the media, you've seen the trials that are going on in Maryland right now, for the first of the Freddie Gray trials. And here in Delaware, we have the trial of the Dover police officer with respect to the encounter with Lateef Dickerson. Neither of those incidents, and many, many more like them, are helpful in the challenge that we face in addressing crime and violence in our cities. And it is a problem in just about every city, large and small, across our country. I think about it a lot. I have a lot of time to think about it. As you may know, the delegation spends a lot of time on the train to Washington back and forth. It's about 2 hours each way. That's 4 hours a day, which is a lot of time to think about a problem that seems intractable and challenges us at every level. And I would just like to talk today briefly, because this is about social justice, about a really difficult part of that challenge. After the Michael Brown incident in Ferguson, Missouri, there was an interview on CNN with the former mayor of New York City, Rudy Giuliani. And I was watching that. I don't remember exactly where I was, but I was watching that interview. And essentially what Mayor Giuliani said was that we have a problem of criminality in those communities. And then he went on, and the interview went on and on. And after that, one of my colleagues, a guy by the name of Emmanuel Cleaver, was interviewed on the same program. And he came right after Mayor Giuliani. And the interviewer asked him the exact same question. And he said, "You heard Mayor Giuliani." He said, "This is really a problem of criminality in those neighborhoods." And Emmanuel, who's both a reverend and a former mayor of Kansas City and one of the most thoughtful members of the U.S. House of Representatives, said this. And the interview, by the way, the context was the whole Michael Brown kind of police overuse of force and all of that. Giuliani had been dismissive of that and said it was a different kind of problem. What Emmanuel said was, we have two problems. We have a problem of crime in these poor minority communities, and we have a problem with the way police respond to that crime and try to stop it. And we have to solve both problems at the same time. It's not an either-or proposition. So if you think about how New York, under Mayor Giuliani, addressed that problem, it was essentially, and I'm oversimplifying it, which I really hesitate to do, because I know what that can do to the decisions that those of us who have to make choices in public life, what it does in communicating the decisions that we make to the public. But essentially, he decided we're going to target these neighborhoods, communities, saturated policing, stop and frisk, anybody that's in the geographic area. What we have learned, I think, over the years is that doesn't work. It works from time to time, but what does it do? it poisons the relationships with all the good people in those communities. Think about the CDC study that was just completed on crime and violence in the city of Wilmington. It essentially said that this problem was the result of a very small portion of the population, mostly African American males of a certain age group, very small, that went through a life trajectory that was horrendous, failure in school, all kinds of particular measures. And at the same time, the vast majority of the people in those communities are good, law-abiding people who are struggling to make ends meet. And so when your law enforcement strategy is to target a community, everybody gets caught up in the net. The better way to do it is the way that I think we're trying to do it here in Wilmington with the leadership of a federal task force, if you will. Senator Coons was very instrumental in getting federal resources to address this problem, to be more targeted in addressing the individuals that are the perpetrators of this crime and violence. And it's called predictive policing. And in some ways, it's an outgrowth of our ability using computers to crunch a whole lot of variables to identify higher risk populations. That's a better way to do it, but think about what I just said. You're using certain criteria to identify and target certain individuals. It's kind of the only way you have to do it. But it does mean that from time to time, you're going to get it wrong. It's not going to be perfect. And it has all kinds of implications about our constitutional guarantees with respect to search and seizure, with respect to innocent until proven guilty, and all the implications that that brings in terms of police and law enforcement relationships with the community. We had a young man who was shot and killed in a wheelchair in the city of Wilmington, which again is being investigated by federal authorities. There'll be a trial and all of that. Nothing really worse can happen when you're trying to address real problems of safety and security and crime in communities than something like that. Because you start from the position where there's not very good relationships between the police and the communities in the first place, and then you overlay something that reinforces people's perception about law enforcement not valuing the human beings in those communities. Why do I bring this up today? Because there's been a lot of discussion over the last several weeks and where I go to work every day about global terrorism, and there will continue to be for days and weeks and months ahead. And we've talked about it in the earlier session. And the challenge for us and for the country is, how do you fight terrorism and protect the security of all of us, everybody in this room, everybody in this state and our country, without violating the rights of all citizens and people who are here in our country? How do you do that? You certainly don't do it by targeting a neighborhood, targeting a religion, targeting a group of people. The only way you can do it is by trying to identify the real perpetrators. And to think that that's easy, I can tell you, and I imagine Senator Carper, with the work that he does on Homeland Security, will tell you that it is not. Since I arrived in Congress in 2011, We've been debating back and forth the collection of data, all of our data, phone call data and internet data and all that. How much we should collect, whether the government should collect it, who gets to look at it, under what conditions, and on and on and on. One of the great things about this country is that those rights are guaranteed and that we have those debates all the time, constantly, back and forth, trying to strike that balance between liberty and security. And that's partly where a conference like this and all of you come in. Because we can't make those very difficult decisions with a lot of simplistic rhetoric. There's been a lot of discussion about the presidential campaign, which I can't pay much attention to it anymore, to be honest with you. Because of the way groups are targeted and because of the simplistic way that people are trying to touch nerves that exist out there among the constituents and the people that we represent. These challenges are hard. And it needs all of us, all of you here at a conference like this, talking about the issues, having the panels, inviting your interactions with those of us who have to make those decisions, and having the dialogue that, if you were here for the last panel, is so important for creating the kind of comfort that's necessary so that people can live free and secure. Let me end by thanking the organizers of the conference and thanking all of you for engaging on a Saturday afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity that you have given me to serve as your only representative in the House. I can guarantee you I go there every day with the intention of doing the right thing for the people that I represent. Thank you very much, and God bless you all.
I want to thank Congressman Carney for opening a very serious conversation. This is not the final word on this issue. This is just the opening gambit. We cannot talk about policing without talking about the militarization of the police force. We cannot talk about these issues without talking about gun control. I didn't hear a single word about gun control. That is an important issue. But what's also most important is that I like the analogy that you drew between community policing and, without using the word, it comes down to either racial profiling when it's looking at crime in cities, or it becomes religious profiling when it becomes counterterrorism. So when we are talking about predictive policing, it is synonymous with, to me, it sounds synonymous with profiling. So, but what is also interesting is that if profiling is contingent on electronic surveillance, then community policing is about human intelligence. And you cannot have, and by now you must have learned it, whether we are using drones in Pakistan or whether we are targeting people here. Human intelligence is absolutely critical in making sure we get the right targets, because every time we hit a wrong target, we radicalize the population and do more harm than good. And so it's very important that the community policing brings in the rest of the community, which serves not only as those who can absorb the negative consequences of the targeting, but also become sources of human intelligence, and therefore it's very important. I hope that in the next few months you will lead this conversation and open this debate. It's really very important. It's also very important that American Muslims do not sit by and stand by, because whatever is the outcome of that conversation, it is going to affect us directly. There is no doubt about it. It is going to shape both counterterrorism strategies and policing strategies in this state. In the next 2-3 minutes, Governor Markell is about to leave, so we're going to do two things. We had a long conversation, a really long meeting with Senator Coons, and who really, really wanted to be with us here, but he is also competing interests are there. He is right now in Paris with President Obama on the climate conference. But he did send us a video. He took the time out to make a recording, and we will play the video. But before that, and before Governor Markell leaves, I want to invite the two partners of mine who helped create the Delaware Council and made this entire conference today possible so that the governor can meet with them, Dr. Naveed Bakr and Brother Jamil Turk.
On behalf of the Delaware Council, I'd like to say thank you to everybody who came in, especially the governors, all the elected officials. It's very important to us to respond to one thing that the governor said, and that is, where do we go from here? This is not about just today, not about us being in the paper or impressing anybody. It's about what do we do next. This Delaware Council is not going anywhere, and we call on everybody present and others to join us, because the work will never stop. Senator Carper mentioned something that started 2,000 years ago, and we continue to abide by it. So the bottom line is, if we want to do something, we should get involved in any way we can. Again, thank you very much for everybody, and thank you for being here supporting us. And we would appreciate if you join us in this long road ahead.
The panel is not going to end with this. We still have two more speakers, so just remain seated. And I want to invite Naveed Bakr here. I have to do a test whether he's a jinn or a human being. He works 22 hours a day. 25. As we got closer and closer to the conference, he never slept. We were having conversations from 3 a.m. to 5 a.m., working either on logistics or program. Naveed.
First of all, I would like to thank everybody who is here, and especially our leadership here. Thank you very much, all of you who are sitting here or who have been sitting here before you and who will be sharing this stage after you today. This convention is a testament that we have a role, we have a responsibility as a community. And even if I just take it as a subset of the American society, Muslim Americans, we can do these things, but these things are not going to happen if we sit back home. I wish, and Muqtada Khan had already said this, I wish that this hall was full and we had the top floor filled up as well. If we are not going to be involved, things are not going to change. This convention is a testament that the leadership in Delaware, they are willing, they want to come in, they want to invest their time and efforts in helping the community to solve social justice issues. They want us to do and play our role, but if we are going to sit down and watch a football game, things are not going to change. So with that, once again, I thank all of you, and I thank all of you too. And I hope we can continue this momentum that we have built today and continue to build upon it. Thank you. And here's the Senator Kuhn's message.
Global and Muslim Affairs is hosting this regional conference that will engage so many Delawareans and friends from the region in addressing the causes and challenges of social justice. Today's convention is focusing on some of the key issues that confront us: prejudice and discrimination, poverty, and the need to build stronger relationships between law enforcement agencies and the communities they serve.
Of the panel. This has been in the works for some time, I believe. This conference was not planned in a few days. But in the past few days, there have been several events that have happened that certainly have changed a lot of the conversation in America. I see that not only in my role as a state senator, I also right now I'm campaigning for U.S. Congress as Congressman Carney runs for governor in 2016. And I want to share two stories, one as a state senator, one as a congressional candidate. A few days ago, I was meeting with a neighborhood association in southern Delaware. And I did a brief introduction of myself, and I love going to Q&A right away. I love making sure that we're talking about whatever it is you want to be talking about. I was shocked by how almost the entirety of the Q&A was dominated by questions about immigration, dominated by questions about Paris, about our military strategy in the Middle East. San Bernardino had just happened, and so news reporting was still very incomplete. And to hear the questions from this audience, which was not politically assembled. It was not an audience of Democrats in a Democratic primary. It was an audience across the political spectrum from this neighborhood. To hear questions that they had, to hear questions that they had about why in Britain the British government is allowing foreign law to guide what happens in towns in Britain that are made up primarily of Muslims. For me to respond to them and say, I don't think it's that the British law is saying that there can't be a pub in that town. I think it's more that if there isn't so much a customer base in the town for a pub, then a smart pub owner might not keep a pub open. And I was trying to be polite in explaining to them really what forces are at play. But for me to hear so much from a group that indicated a certain vision of what America means and what it means to be American and what it looks like to be American. And to contrast that with the brief story I'll mention in my state Senate capacity, where I believe it was earlier this calendar year, might have been last calendar year, where I was at the Islamic Society of Delaware for a carnival. It was a very, very brief introduction. It was a whirlwind of a quick tour through the carnival. And I came across the grill. And the language being spoken around the grill was not English, but I asked for a quick translation from my friend who had introduced me to many of the members present there. And it was a kind of conversation that happens around almost any American grill, where there are 4 or 5 or any more than 2, basically, men. Who's grilling the best? Why the person on the grill at that moment is doing it wrong. It was amazing. And then what wasn't typical, though, about an American Girl story, but what was very inspirational about that American Girl story at the Islamic Society was that when I was introduced to the people around the grill and learned that they were leaders in Delaware finance, in the Delaware chemical industries, in Delaware medicine. I was surprised but not surprised. But when compared to the questions I fielded earlier this week from a different group of Delawareans and understanding what many of them, not all of them, but what many of them envision when they think of an American grill, those two stories clash. And they clash at a time now when, for some of the very legitimate national security concerns that have been raised here about how we respond to different situations in our world, about how we respond to, in my belief, accepting refugees from a war-torn region, but making sure to do very appropriate security screenings, or now, even more complicated, how we change our immigration laws to adjust for the fact that, setting refugees aside, we have other issues in our immigration laws that allow people to come to America without any security screenings. And very unfortunately, it seems like that may have been related to a tragedy in California that is entirely unrelated to the way in which the dramatic majority of Muslims in America and throughout the world practice their faith. But it very much is something that I see on the campaign trail, and the tragedies in the recent weeks have changed the conversations, the questions that I'm asked as a congressional candidate. But most importantly, I want to say, in my role as state senator, to highly encourage all of you to make sure to be proactive in engaging with your local elected officials. Where the dramatic majority of laws in our country are passed, where in many ways the biggest difference in your day-to-day lives is formed, making sure you know who your state senator and your state representatives are, meeting with him or her at least once a year, making sure that he or she puts your face to your name, is an important part of what needs to happen in America given the tremendous forces at play. It is imperative, and I've enjoyed so much my conversations the past months with members of Delaware's Muslim community, focusing often on how difficult the Affordable Care Act can be to comply with, focusing on what role the minimum wage has in trying to ensure economic prosperity, or at the least avoid economic poverty, talking about how to improve Delaware's education system. These are the conversations that I've had with leading Muslims in Delaware's community. These are the conversations that I try to share with other Delawareans who might not, right off the bat, understand the diversity within Islam as a theology and religion, the diversity within the Delaware Muslim community, and what people's concerns are. That's the message I try to share. I implore that you help me and help others share that message, primarily by making sure to be involved and emailing us or calling us and asking us to meet for a meal, asking us just to meet down in Dover or come to your home. Being part of the political process before you might need to even ask for assistance with something is critical, particularly given what we're seeing unfolding at the global level and at the national level. I know for a fact that there are tremendously intelligent and articulate and even humorous, although one in particular not as funny as he thinks he is, members of the Muslim community here in Delaware. And I know that for a fact. I'm sharing that with my colleagues. I invite you and ask and implore that you continue to play a role. I think a conference like today is a key start of a broader voice for Delaware's Muslim community. I think inviting more elected officials, I was with Congressman Carney, Representative Ed Ozinski, and myself at the Eid Festival at the Bob Carpenter Center in July, making sure we understand what role we can play, understand more about all Delawareans, especially with such a beautiful culture at a time when so much of the world might assume otherwise, is a critical thing that we need to develop here in Delaware. Conferences like today are a key start. I thank you so much for your participation and for the honor of being invited, and would love, if any time that remains, to answer any questions as part of the panel, but certainly afterwards here. And I look forward to the second annual conference, the third annual conference, and many more in the future. Thank you very much.
The Delaware Council is very grateful for Brian, who's reached out to us and has also been very helpful in arranging many things. Speaker is Mazhar Rishi. Mazhar Rishi is a doctor, a physician, an important pillar of our community. He is also a reservist with the United States Air Force, and he is also a community leader who's very active in mobilizing the American Muslims of this area and participating in politics, in engaging the mainstream, and he's here to talk about his role, his current role in pushing Emerge USA. And without much ado.
Assalamu alaikum. Can everyone hear me? So let me tell you my own story first. And I'm sure you will relate to that because many of you are immigrants and just like me. So I came to US in 1984. And when I landed at Dulles International Airport in Washington, D.C., not really knowing anyone. I had only $1,300 in my pocket. In addition to $1,300, I had my medical degree from Pakistan. And so I called this place my home. I came in. I struggled for the first year because I'm sure most of you struggled as well with with your families. But then I was persistent. In Islam, as you know, there is a hadith famous that seek knowledge, even if you have to go to China. And yesterday's China is today's United States of America. And that's why I came to this country. And why did I come here? I came here in pursuit of education. And that's why most of the Muslim Americans, they come here because of education. Education for themselves and also education for their kids. And that's why we came here. And this is where we invested all our money, all our efforts. And now we call this place as our home. So I came in, I did my residency training at George Washington University. While I was in the 4th year of residency training, an Air Force recruiting team came over and they said they need doctors in the Air Force. And so they said, we need volunteers. Any of the resident doctors would like to sign up? And you know what? I thought about it because my dad had served the Allied forces during the Second World War. And he fought against the Japanese with the Allied forces. On the Burma front. And some of you people may have realized that there was a Burma front at that time where the Japanese were very close to India. And there was a tough fight over there. And my dad's unit was surrounded by the Japanese forces. They didn't have any food to eat. So the only thing they could find at that time were these bats. So they started shooting at these bats, and then they would eat these bats just to survive. So he served the Air Force for 30 plus years. And then when I came here, when these recruiters came in, I remembered my dad, and I said, he had such a good lifestyle, and I wanted to follow his footsteps, except that I was a physician. So I signed up for the Air Force, US Air Force. And I served in the Air Force in California at Travis Air Force Base. I was a newly minted major. Working at David Grant U.S. Air Force Medical Center in near Vacaville, California. I served there for 3 years. My lovely wife, who's sitting right there, she was with me, and because we were there, she went to Cal State University and finished her bachelor's in accounting. Then, I wanted to come back to the East Coast, so I told my Air Force commander that, look, I'm thinking of leaving the Air Force, but so he said, well, we really want you to stay in the Air Force, and he said, where do you want to go? I said, look, my family is in Maryland, and they said, well, no problem, we'll send you to Walter Reed Army Medical Center, and you can stay there. And so I thought about it, talked to Samia, and signed up. I said, okay, fine, I'll go there, and I was at Walter Reed for 2 years. Then, we were living in Bethesda, Maryland, so I asked the Air Force advisor, look, the hospital that's closer to me is a Navy hospital. I'm in the Air Force, but I would love to work for the Navy. And they said, fine, there's no problem because, the Navy would love to have somebody like you. So they assigned me to go to Bethesda Naval Hospital. So I served for 6 years over there. And then, there was an opening in Delaware at St. Francis Hospital. And so initially when I had signed up for the Air Force, it was only for 2 years, so I had already served them for 6 years. I said, look, I've, served more than what initially I had signed up for. So I asked the commander, look, there's an opening for me in Delaware. I really want to go to Delaware. And they said, fine, but you have to stay in the reserves. So I signed up and I said, fine, they released me from the active duty and I stayed in the reserves. And, ever since I was going to Bethesda Naval Hospital, and as some of you may know, there's the America's Medical School is there, and it's called Uniformed Services University of Health Sciences in Bethesda, Maryland. So I have been teaching there on the faculty as a reservist. So I have, alhamdulillah, done 25 years of service in the Air Force. Now I have 2 kids, 2 lovely kids, and my wife, Samia, helped raise them. And a daughter who's in Portland, Oregon, and she's going to law school there. She's very big on environmental law. And she worked in Pennsylvania on the shale gas with one of the senators, Senator Andy Dinniman, on crafting some of the bills. And so she is the one who has motivated me now that, look, Dad, there's Muslims in this country are punching back for all the media and everyone. Anything that happens, immediately they point out to the Muslims. This is not what America is. This is a place where, people need to be treated with their dignity and respect. We come to this country with, very important skill sets. There are a lot of doctors here. Wasif Qureshi is sitting left on this slide. Means cardiologist, interventional cardiologist, sitting right here. So God forbid if someone gets a heart attack, he's probably will be the one, helping that patient. And there are a lot of other doctors, there are a lot of engineers, there are a lot of businessmen, and we have given everything to this country. We did everything, whatever we could. All our properties are here, all our bank accounts are here, all the charities that we give is into this country. So we have done a lot for this country. And that's the reason why the American Muslims, if you look at the profile of the American Muslim, we are more educated than an average American. We make more money than an average American. We are, as hardworking as any other American. There are thousands of Muslim Americans who have served the U.S. military also and law enforcement. So this is what we are. And when I'm standing in front of you, I'm not standing here in front of you as a Muslim, I'm an American. Because this is America, and that's why I came here, so that our rights are protected in this country. But you go back and look at the history of this country, look at when the Constitution was first ratified, and as you know that Delaware was the first state. But that Constitution did not guarantee the rights of all the Americans, because initially only those Americans could vote in the elections who were white Americans, white men who owned property or were rich or slaves. That's our history. Women had no right to vote. Women had to suffer for like 80 years. They struggled for doing the women's suffrage during the 19th century, 80 years before they got a right to vote in 1920. And the African Americans, they struggled for a long time. They got right to vote in 1965 after J.F. Kennedy. So people have done a lot of hard work in order to earn that right to vote. Alhamdulillah, we have the right to vote right now in this country. We have it, we got it. But the point of the matter is everyone registered to vote? Because, we talk about social justice, but social justice, is really not going to help you unless you are on the table where the legislation is made. And that's why the connection with the legislators is so important for us, that we have to make that connection. And that's why I want to introduce to you this organization called Emerge USA. And I truly feel that this is the organization that we really need right now, because, one of the officials said that, where do we go from here? So it's fine, you have this convention, and we talked about social justice and the importance of social justice, but the question is right now, what can we do about it? How can we empower American Muslims? So Emerge USA is an organization that started in Florida. It's a civic engagement organization, and it focuses on involving the American Muslims and other underrepresented communities into the electoral process. That's what the goal is, with a focus on Muslims, Arabs, and South Asians, Massa community. And that's what we specialize in, making sure that everyone who's registered to vote is registered to vote. We educate you about who the candidates are, and so that you will go out and vote for the right candidate that will work with us. And lastly, the most important thing is, we also have educational programs, leadership programs for our young adults, so they can also become actual leaders and they can become elected officials in this country. Because without this, we cannot really empower our communities. We will work with all the underrepresented communities. We are not an exclusive organization. We are an inclusive organization. So whether it's women, as you know, women are a little over 50% of the population. But look at the Congress right now. How many women do you see there? Do you see 50% women there? They're not there. So we'll work with the women also and any minorities. Look at the Native Americans, they are in these reservations. Do they have representation there? How are they basically living their lives right now? And look at the African Americans. They got the right to vote in 1965, but they are basically underrepresented, and that's why they are also punching back just like the Muslims. You look at what is happening with the law enforcement and there's racial profiling going on, and it's not the right way. This is not the American way to treat people, and that's why why it's so important for us to work together. So there are 3 things that I want you to do before you leave. So this is what you want to do. Make sure you're registered to vote, number 1. You make sure you are, and you vote for not only the national elections, you will also vote for the local elections. And then you also become a member of Emerge USA. Become a member of Emerge USA so we can guide you and help you, because it is your organization. And lastly, our sponsors, Delaware Council, you want to help them too, because they are the think tank for us in this area. So we are working very closely with Delaware Council, and we want to make sure that we really move this agenda forward and take this to the next level. And that's why we need all your help from in this community. So thank you very much for coming. I don't want to take any more of your time, but please register to vote. Make sure you're educated about the elected officials. One of the elected officials, 2 of them are here right now. Carney is going to be running for the governor. Congressman Carney, and then you have Senator Townsend, and I think he wants to run for the Congress also. So we want to get educated about them, and I want to be educated, and we will provide you that education so you can make the right decision for yourself.